Hey, this is John Reed. I have unceremoniously raided the MongoDB Palo Alto headquarters with Kelly Stirman from Mongo. How's it going?
Great. It's good to have you here.
You are the VP of Strategy and Marketing. Is that right?
Yes, VP of Strategy and Product Marketing at MongoDB.
But you actually know a lot about data and data issues, and you're kind of actually a little bit obsessed with researching and learning about that stuff, which is what we're going to talk about.
Okay. I spend a couple hours every day researching, reading things online, reading academic research. Before I got into this, basically 20 years in the industry and databases, mostly in the technical role.
Yeah. We're also going to talk a little bit about security because Mongo has been in the news a little bit. And this is an opportunity to educate around how we need all be vigilant about security in different ways, which is what it comes down to. So we're going to get into that a little bit. But first, just tell me a little bit about your latest obsessions with data. I mean, you said some interesting things to me, like that you don't even consider MongoDB to be a NoSQL database, which is kind of shocking for certain people that want to categorize you as such. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, NoSQL sort of became the other bucket, and lots of things went into it that maybe had very little in common with one another.
Yeah. The
way I think about MongoDB is that there are all these wonderful things about relational databases. I love a relational database. I'm not here to knock on the relational database.
Not going to bash those people, huh?
And there are great things like, the notion of expressive query language and secondary indexes, strong consistency, and integrations with all those enterprise tools and standards that have been evolving over the past several decades. But people started building different kinds of databases, about 10 years ago, and mostly because they were running into some limitations with the relational database.
Right.
And they started focusing on flexibility of data model and scalability and performance and being always on all over the world. But they kind of gave up all those great things about relational databases. And what I think is so powerful about MongoDB is it gives you the best of both worlds. It preserves the virtues of the relational database, but gives you the scalability and flexibility and always-on abilities of things we think of as NoSQL.
All right, folks. So that was your MongoDB plug. But so that's why you guys are great, according to you. But no, it does make sense. But actually, you've been actually trying to sort through this from the perspective of customers as well, who are trying to make sense of this exploding universe of concepts, right? I mean, you're dealing with everything from the phenomenon of container technology to graph databases to streaming data. Those are all things you've been looking at. Can you maybe start peeling those back a little bit, help us to understand what that's all about?
Sure. For me, MongoDB is, while it puts food on the table for me and for my family, it's just a piece of the larger story. And it's a very interesting and quickly evolving story about how people are capturing and leveraging data for insight in their business and for competitive advantage. To sort of connect everything together, all the different types of systems that create data, all the types of systems that consume data, all the different ways you might want to analyze the data. It's not one single thing that does that for you. And today, what people are working towards is lots of smaller independent components that are working together in concert to achieve some larger goal. And so you see that, so these two trends that we were just talking about in terms of streaming technologies, I've been spending a fair bit of time looking at Kafka, for example, where connecting different systems and reliably moving the data between those systems, conditionally moving it from in one place to another based on certain rules, even giving you some insight into the data maybe before it lands in any kind of database, I think is really interesting.
And you said that was a LinkedIn-based project originally, is that right?
Right. Apache Kafka began at LinkedIn,
okay.
And there's some folks who've left and are now out commercializing the project.
And you know some of those people, so you've been chatting with them.
Yeah, one of the nice things about being here in Palo Alto is you sort of run into people at coffee shops, and they're literally around the corner from us.
And so why is this a big deal?
Well, I think it's pretty early, but I think the people have really organizations have really come to realize that their perspective on their data is not in one system. Mm-hmm. And it's not a frozen point in time. It's moving quickly, and an important piece of that puzzle is the infrastructure that connects all the different systems and facilitates the movement of the data between all those different systems.
So is part of the implications there that organizations might be making flawed decisions because in this moment in time they don't have that stream currently working?
Or that the time it takes to move the data is so long that the opportunity for insight disappears. And so by putting this infrastructure in place that allows you to more reliably and more quickly move data, you're putting yourself in a position to have a faster time to insight around what's happening in your business.
Right, because in some situations when data is a week old, it's no longer going to help you.
We're well past the week. Now we're talking about tens of milliseconds being the threshold at which data starts to lose its value.
Well, certainly in industries like threat detection, you can see why that would be
high
a
frequency
problem.
Trading, threat detection, fraud detection, recommendation engines. There's increasingly different kinds of use cases where time is really of the essence, but you're also not able necessarily to address the needs of an application through one single technology and one system. It's a lot of things working together to make it happen.
So there's a data integration issue that's a daunting part of that problem because you might be dealing with someone who's touching parts of your system that are not connected.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think data integration is one way people think about it. The way sort of the emerging trend is just more streaming analytics and people getting a closer look to the data as close to when it's born as possible.
Do you think we could apply Kafka tomorrow to solve the lost luggage issue with airplanes? Because that's one example where a week later is really shitty.
Haven't you learned to not check your bags?
No, it's a good point. It is a good point. But sometimes they check it at the gate. I don't know if you've ever been through that hell, but anyhow, moving on. So talk to me about graph databases. There's a lot of sex appeal around this. Do you think this is hype, or do you think graph databases have a new dimension of value to offer people?
I think it's very interesting. I think there is some hype, but I think there's a lot there. And frankly, I've found, the learning curve on the graph model and graph queries and using these systems is fairly steep. But people, once you get into it, I think it's extremely powerful. Some of the things you can do, and there's certainly a place. But we've started to view graph as fairly narrow in its applicability, just sort of looking at the broad database landscape. And we view it as something we'd like to see as a capability of MongoDB. That we're not going to rewrite the database as a graph database, but we can give graph operators and certain new types of indexes that will allow you to get most of the way there. And this is not us just being in an ivory tower. We're hearing enough from users in different sorts of industries like healthcare, where the analytics you can perform with these graph models gives you some capabilities you really just can't get otherwise.
Yeah, so maybe you have an example of how that could work, hypothetical at least, like how can graph make a difference that you couldn't get from a document?
So fundamentally, you would still model the data in documents because we view document as sort of the superset of all these different underlying data models, including relational. But with the right indexes and operators, you can use it like you would think about using a graph database. So there's a couple of different examples in maybe the one that's most obvious is for industries like telcos, where your core assets are networked things. You think about it, the network that a telco manages and operates. Being able to interrogate and ask questions about that network through this sort of an approach gives you a way to do things like put the right advertisements in front of your customers at the right time, or find opportunities to more efficiently stand up cell towers for better coverage, or understand where you maybe have overdensity or insufficient density coverage in certain places. That's a sort of physical network topology, but there are also relationship networks in terms of people, in healthcare, in terms of drugs and how they relate to certain ailments, and being able to infer new sorts of treatments based on data that you already know.
Right, and sounds like there's a visual element that comes into play sometimes too, right? To be able to visualize data in ways that you might not pick up on if you were just crunching numbers.
I think that is absolutely the case. That there's a really interesting opportunity, and you see this in some of the demonstrations and applications people build, where you're not looking at data in a simple spreadsheet type report. You're looking at these rich sort of interlinked data structures, and you're able to explore them visually. Almost like you're in a game or something like that.
So, breaking news, MongoDB is going to become a graph database, and John Reed gets the story. But no, to your point, while you're not abandoning what you're doing, you're also saying that document-based databases have become very well established, and you're evolving with the landscape and the times. Is that basically what you're trying to get across?
Yeah, I mean, I think what most organizations don't, they want to standardize on a relatively small portfolio of technologies.
Right.
And I think we're safely in an era now where it's not, one database for all things, but it's also not 20 databases that I'm going to use. It's like, I need a couple of different things, and that gets me, pretty much everything I need. And so we need to continue to push the envelope on what you can do with MongoDB. And we think we're in a great place. And graph is, is an important part of what we're going to do in the future.
And the one other piece you and I were talking about before I hit the record button was the impact of containers. How do you see the container phenomenon sort of provoked by Docker and now other players? How do you see that fitting into this world?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch just how quickly containers have taken off. And I think the lesson is a similar lesson that we learned, is that if you give developers the right APIs and the right interfaces, they will, they are the kingmakers, and they're going to, anoint some new technology if you have the right experience, the right user experience for the developer. And I think that's what Docker has. When you what's the difference between Docker and VMware or standard virtualization technologies? It's the interface for how you use the technology is designed for people to script, environments into their application build processes.
Right.
And it's been really interesting to watch. So for us, we've been, we're sort of 7-8 years into the project now, and containers didn't exist when we started. Virtualization was relatively new still, but it's just another way. We want you to be able to run MongoDB anywhere, and containers are the latest area that we need to be able to accommodate. And insofar as MongoDB is a distributed system, the what's interesting and happening in the container space now, Docker has won the sort of container standard debate.
Right.
The interesting the wars right now are the orchestration options for managing all these containers, and MongoDB is distributed, so the way you run MongoDB needs to sort of fit into how you're going to run all these different containers with your orchestration tool, and that's an interesting thing that we're working on right now.
Yeah, and you also mentioned to me that while we were talking about the DB Engine's rankings, because you guys are currently number 4, and there's some rather big players.
Modestly sized players.
Yeah.
Microsoft, IBM, Oracle.
You guys have kind of won the battles that are a little easier to win there in terms of adoption, but you also were talking about in terms of cloud that you think, like in the cloud side, that you really have a lot of room to sort of, I guess, claim or dominate that space. Are you seeing a lot of activity with cloud-based?
Oh, it's enormous. I mean, it's sort of a funny thing. In all my years in software, you generally knew who was using your product. Like they had to fill out a form to download it, or they had to buy it from you, or whatever. And today, people download MongoDB over 20,000 times a day just from our website. We don't know what they're doing with it, but we have some insight based on our cloud management tools into where people are running and what kinds of environments, what sorts of operating systems, machine instance types, all of those good things. And the numbers are just sort of overwhelming in how much usage there is in the cloud, and it's just a piece of the bigger picture.
Yeah. So I've talked about this in the past in terms of data gravity, like that as organizations move more and more stuff to the cloud, the data gravity in an organization moves towards the cloud, right? As you started to integrate more and more cloud systems together, and you have less and less data residing on premise systems. Do you think you're kind of seeing that as well, that we're starting to see this sort of shift?
I hate answers that begin with "it depends," but there is a really strong difference between sort of traditional Fortune 500 type companies,
Sure,
and companies that are more open-minded, or maybe just newer, or maybe their whole business is in the cloud.
Cloud native.
Anyway.
They started a cloud native business, or they're following the darling footsteps of Netflix and Amazon and such. Yeah.
But there is no. I think 2014 or 2015. I read this in a Gartner report recently. Was the first year ever that there was more growth in projects in the cloud than on-prem.
Right.
And so we've sort of crossed the
we're seeing
Rubicon,
that,
and we are just increasingly the workload, the greater proportion of workloads will be in the cloud. It's irresistible, but there I think will always be some amount of on-prem on-prem usage. And so what we see is the first place is test and QA. Like I'm designing and prototyping, and if I can just completely eliminate that whole provisioning step of my project. Hey, IT, I need some servers to run my project. Okay, we've really got everything streamlined now. It should be about 8 weeks, and we can have your servers up and ready for you. It's like people don't tolerate that anymore. You can get in just a couple of seconds all the servers I want on AWS or Azure. So I think it's test and dev initially, and then it's the new applications where maybe there's it's a mobile app or it's something that's more sort of customer facing, and the elasticity properties of the cloud are what's really compelling.
Yeah.
But there's sort of the traditional stuff, the ERP systems that are, they're still running. They mostly serve an internal business function, and having them in the cloud is not hugely compelling. The other one that you see, back to your concept of data gravity or data inertia, is it's not free or instantaneous to move the data. And so where you have maybe your traditional data warehouse or these really big systems is where it's like, do I really want to unplug the hard drives and put them on a truck and drive them to the data center? Because that's the efficient way to move the data. That's where I still see more on-prem.
Right. All right. I wish I had some Law and Order music, like for the rip from the headlines part of this podcast. Dun, 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 dun. But we do have a couple of headlines here involving Mongo and security, which I'm sure you're already familiar with. And one of them has to do with Microsoft Careers page, which attackers, black hats, if you will, were able to exploit. And that happened to be running on Mongo. And then we have another headline that hit recently that I thought was interesting for some other reasons that involved 13 million MacKeeper users exposed after the MongoDB door was left open. And in that case, it talks about how there's a ton of different databases, whether it's Cassandra, CouchDB, or Redis, all sort of essentially can be exposed. You talked to me about this earlier, about you got to lock your door, which is sort of implied by the headline there. What is your response to all that?
Well, I mean, we take security very, very seriously. It's been a core part of the product for a number of years, and every release that I've been at the company, which is almost 4 years now, we have added more and more security features into the product. And this is not just in our paid version of MongoDB. In the open source version of MongoDB, you have everything you need to secure the system in a variety of different ways. So what you have in these examples are people that have deployed MongoDB with all the security disabled. And we treat users as adults, and they have the option of enabling or disabling security.
Right.
And it's security. I think the analogy is very appropriate in terms of your front door or locking your car. It's having the security on is less convenient. So I think what happens is people turn it off for the sake of convenience, and then they just go put these things in the cloud and forget to turn the security back on. And most of the data, we believe, is just test data or dummy data where they don't really care. There's really, the vulnerability is there, but they're not concerned about any significant data loss. But it's certainly the case that that's not true for all of these. And some people are not taking precautions that they should be taking. So what we've done is made it wide, taken all of our best resources in terms of security best practices and put them together in a blog, have other free resources, educational resources, and have tried to get the word out. Like, look, you should maybe assess your current situation and make sure that you have things secured the way they should be. What I would say to anyone on the podcast, for example, is think about all the sensitive data on your smartphone. There's a lot. There's more than you could possibly know in some ways. And if you don't have a passcode on your phone or you're not using the thumbprint or fingerprint reader, it's the same thing. You're leaving things wide open to somebody who finds your device.
Yeah, definitely. I also didn't know about this search engine called Shodan, which I wish I knew enough about databases to exploit this search engine because it's pretty fascinating. You can essentially crawl almost any database service connected to the internet that's exposed in any way, which is fodder, I think, for some pretty fascinating stuff. If you had some free
it's
time.
not just databases. It's anything that has that has an IP address. They're able to they basically crawl all of that and process it and give you some interesting capabilities.
It's
crazy.
A cool
resource. So one of the things that in their blog post about this, and they've been really supportive, and we've engaged with them on a number of occasions, is like, look, the tens or hundreds of, it was like a petabyte of data. I remember it was a huge volume of data in aggregate, and the tens of thousands of instances that are out there are a small fraction of the total amount of usage of MongoDB and these other technologies that they covered as well. It's like it's hard to imagine just how many servers are running in data centers running these different pieces of software. And so they wrote about it's not just MongoDB, it's all these other technologies. It's just that MongoDB is the most popular, and so that's the one we chose to talk about.
Right, yeah. I said, even in this article, it listed a lot of the other NoSQL databases as being essentially subject to the same issue entirely. And I mean, it seems to me that the problem with these security things is that they're really important, but a lot of the media that comes out around them is sensational, like Microsoft is on the hot seat now, and Mongo or whoever it is, and in reality, security is kind of a shared responsibility, right? Like, it would be nice to just say, oh, put it on these 3 vendors to solve my security issues, but as a customer or as an individual consumer, you have a responsibility. And a lot of times when you look at enterprise security breaches, it has to do with either employee who are not up to speed on security protocols, or systems that have not been updated and patched to the latest releases, which is a constant problem on personal computers as well. And so unfortunately, as much as we would like to sort of turn this into sensational scapegoating, it's actually, in my opinion, the era we live in, and we all unfortunately have to take some responsibility for that.
I couldn't agree more. And, honestly, in our internal discussions about this, it was, this is unfortunate that these are coming out, and they, some people might view this as reflecting negatively on MongoDB, but stepping back from that for a moment, awareness is going to go up, and hopefully, as an outcome from this, we have people being more careful about their security in MongoDB and other systems as well.
Well, and I never really view these types of moments as static events, to be honest with you, because my feeling when I look at issues like this, which are frankly going to happen to every vendor, however responsible or not they are, and I look at that in terms of how do you respond to that situation. How does it impact your future approaches? Are you able to talk transparently about it? Are you able to better educate your customers? Because a lot of it comes down to education, right? And to me, this is the kind of thing that just shows you that you, like your customers, are going to have to be vigilant about over-educating on this stuff, because it's out there.
Yeah. And it, like you said, you're never done. It's always the threats are evolving, they're growing in volume. we now have, I don't want to, get all spooky on your listeners, but the number of state-sponsored groups who are employed and encouraged strongly to do this kind of work is continuing to rise. So
right.
It's an ongoing responsibility that, there will be new roles in large companies created exclusively to work on the problem of securing their systems and their data.
Care to take a position on Apple versus the FBI since we're on this topic?
Just on it for me personally, it's impossible. It just seems preposterous that you could open the door and close it and have it never open again. Like, I think what Apple has been asked to do is, I understand the motivation, but I think you're letting a genie out of a bottle that you'll never be able to put back in.
Right. It seems like the request opens up the possibility of there's the way it's been framed. There's no way to just solve it for this phone, right? Like that you would essentially create a backdoor that would be applicable in many other cases.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be any attempt to try to restrict that.
Yeah, I mean, there are the details have sort of evolved, and I'm no expert on Apple hardware or the OS. But if we just sort of step back from the specifics of this case to encryption more broadly, of somebody should have the master key, somebody of authority should have the master key. I think that's impossible. Would never work.
Right. Well, I guess time will tell. My biggest question about it is, will it? I tend to support the Apple side of this to a large extent, but I worry that if they get these decisions to go against them based on political climate and stuff, that it can end up almost causing more harm, because then a punitive, regulation comes down that prevents the kind of encryption they're trying to accomplish. So I'm not sure what the solution is there. I keep hoping for some backdoor compromise to happen behind the scenes. The other interesting thing is like the cloud data. Because, the cloud data is less secure, and that's sort of gone undiscussed in this thing. But, the FBI wants the phone, but the cloud data was a lot easier to get access to. And it's like, I'm not sure that as an individual, you and me should be totally comfortable with that either,
Yes. It's the cloud. It must be okay. But there's been plenty. We talk about these security breaches of, whatever data is in these MongoDB instances, but it's all kinds of systems, and it's not just in the cloud. It's in big companies, it's in little companies, and security it's going to be a dominant topic for us.
Well, Kelly, I'm interrupted your afternoon where you were planning to have a productive afternoon of writing, so I've really screwed that up for you. But you told me that you were writing on something that you can't talk about, which is super interesting because we can't discuss it. But it pertains to your upcoming MongoDB World Conference in June. You're allowed to say that much, I think.
Yeah, it's something that we'll be able to talk a lot more about.
Yeah. So as we wrap, give us the short version of why someone should show up to MongoDB in June. Well, what are they going to get there?
MongoDB World is our annual conference. It's a lot of technology conferences are out here in the Bay Area. There aren't that many that are in New York. This is our home turf. The mothership is there, Midtown, and it's a developer-focused conference. So it's lots and lots of deep content from the people who write the database and write the systems around the database. But it's also presentations from customers talking about what they're doing with the technology, what's been hard, what's been easy. We don't audit anything. It's like everything is out there. It's 2 days. It's be between 2,000, 2,500 people, and it's actually a lot of fun and a very, very rich, worthwhile conference, I think.
I recall going to some standing room only Spark and Docker sessions last year too, so you have some interesting crossover with some of the other stuff that's going on. So,
like I said, we fit into the larger world, and we need to know how all that happens.
Are you allowed to reveal the musical guest?
The theme of the conference, one of the themes of MongoDB is for giant ideas. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited.
Drum roll.
We're pretty excited to have They Might Be Giants playing at the
There you go. So for some of you, that's gonna like be a great wave of nostalgia washing over you right now. They Might Be Giants. Sounds good. Good luck
I've
with
been
it.
listening to him for at least 25 years. So
Well, there you go. All right. Well, looks like I'll probably see you in June. Good luck.
thanks. Look forward to it.
Take care.